is a Shaw Public Affairs presentation.
Good evening and welcome to the BC Liberal Leadership Debate. I'm Vaughn Palmer. Our panel tonight is Keith Baldry from Global Television, Justine Hunter from the Globe and Mail newspaper. And here's our panel tonight. The candidates, Kevin Falcon, Christy Clark, Mike DeYoung, and George Abbott. We've adopted a straightforward format tonight. The panelists will, first of all, ask questions of the candidates, and then there'll be a segment of the candidates asking each other questions. We'll come back to the panel, more questions for the candidates, one more round of the candidates asking each other questions, and we'll be done. It'll take about an hour. The candidates get closing statements as well. Fair amount of ground to cover tonight, so let's get started. We'll start with the panel. Keith Baldry is going to ask a question, and it goes to Kevin Falcon.
Thanks, Juan. Candidates, in last week's provincial budget, the only significant tax increase was a 6% hike in medical service premiums, which critics say hits the middle class particularly hard. If you become premier, would you roll that increase back?
No, I wouldn't do that, Vaughn, because I think one of the things we have to do is be really candid with the public about both the challenges and the opportunities in healthcare. But, you know, obviously healthcare, we are now seeing that budget has grown dramatically. As you well know, it's almost half of the provincial budget, and I think we have a responsibility to make sure that everyone has to do their part in contributing towards that budget. And although a 6% increase in medical service premiums is certainly a challenge sometimes, I do think we have an obligation to contribute towards an outstanding healthcare system that we all enjoy in British Columbia.
Christy Clark has the next answer.
Well, I think the first thing to remember is that it's important that we balance the budget as a first priority for British Columbians. That's the thing that I think is most important to us. We have to make sure that we are managing people's money well. If BC Liberals don't manage people's money well, who can voters count on to make sure that that happens? So my first priority before getting into fancy tax cuts and big spending promises is to make sure that we balance our budget. We do, though, need to look at the total tax burden that government is putting on people. And when you look over across the country and add up all the burden that's there for us, we have low personal income taxes, but the tax burden for British Columbians is about middle of the pack when you look across Canada. We have to deal with that. We have to make sure we're competitive over the longer term, but my first priority would be to make sure that we get that budget balanced.
Mike DeYoung is next.
Thanks, Vaughn, to the panelists and Shaw, and of course my fellow candidates. Well, the short answer is at a time when healthcare spending has gone from $8 billion to $16 billion, the kind of rollback that was posed in the question, though politically tempting, probably isn't realistic. The gray tsunami is moving through and the costs are continuing to mount. So the conversation we need to have and the action and decisions we need to make are how we are going to fund healthcare at a time when the amount and the number of people using it is increasing and the cost of providing that service is increasing. So yeah, it's a 6% increase and no one likes to see that. When you measure that against the doubling of healthcare costs from 2001 to 2011, 8 billion to 16 billion, I think it would be irresponsible to suggest we can roll it back.
And the last answer comes from George Abbott.
Yeah, thank you. I wouldn't roll it back either. I think only a small portion of the $16 billion that we expend roughly on healthcare comes from MSP, and I think it's important that we retain that. We do have a demographic challenge coming before us in the years ahead. The next 10, 20, 30 years, we're going to see the older portion of our population grow from about 14% now to 25 to 30% in the years ahead. We need to build a strong healthcare system to deal with that. I know we have a very good healthcare system in British Columbia. The Conference Board of Canada believes it is the best healthcare system in Canada. We need to keep investing in that system, and the portion that comes from MSP is an important part of that.
The next question from the panel comes from Justine Hunter, and the candidates will answer in reverse order, starting with George Abbott. So here's Justine.
BC Hydro is proposing rate increases of 50% over the next 5 years. That's 50. I'm wondering if the panelists would, if they were Premier, would allow that kind of increase to go ahead.
I would, even with the increases that will be coming to BC Hydro rates, it's important to recognize that Hydro is making a long overdue investment in the infrastructure in our province. And even with the increases over the next few years, we will see British Columbia still have the second lowest hydro rates in North America. But these are investments for very important things like the interior to lower mainland transmission line upgrade. It's for the Northwest transmission line. It is for a variety of very necessary investments in our BC Hydro infrastructure. We have a great Crown Corporation in BC Hydro, but we need to keep investing in it. We need to invest in the new smart meters. We need to keep making wise investments if we're going to continue to have a great hydro system in British Columbia led by BC Hydro.
Mike DeYoung gives the next answer.
So what's our vision for BC Hydro? Because costs obviously increase. We do, as you've heard, need to invest in new infrastructure. But I think the point is here, are we as a province, are we as a government, prepared to, one, ensure that we achieve electricity self-sufficiency? I think that's a no-brainer. I think that's the starting point. But are we also prepared to take advantage of our position as the source of clean, green, renewable energy for North America? I think that's the next step. And just as we are prepared to and do export resources, forest products, mineral products, the notion of exporting clean, green energy and capitalizing on that business to produce jobs, create jobs in all regions of British Columbia is something that we need to seriously move forward on.
And Christy Clark.
Well, BC Hydro is an important public asset. It's the crown jewel of the crown corporations out there, and it has played a tremendous role in building and opening up this province. A generation made a huge investment in it, and we are all benefiting from that still today. So BC Hydro does need to continue to make investments to be able to make sure that we're protecting our power advantage for future generations, and also making sure that we're opening up our economy across the province. But, you know, I've been talking about a families first agenda for change in this campaign, and part of that is making sure that the total tax burden, that, you know, and you can define that should include BC Hydro rates and medical services premiums and personal income taxes, which of course are some of the lowest in North America now. Look at that total tax burden and get a feel for whether or not families are actually able to get ahead with that. I think government needs to take a more holistic look at the costs that British Columbia families bear, and that's something that I would do as your Premier.
And Kevin Falcon has the last answer in this go-round.
Thank you very much, Vaughn. Look, BC Hydro is a critical part of our, not only our energy future, but also the future of the province. And the fact of the matter is, if we're candid about it, governments in the past, frankly, took a lot out of BC Hydro in terms of revenues, but didn't put a lot back in terms of investment. And BC Hydro now, in the last 4 or 5 years, has been engaged in a multi-billion-dollar reinvestment, upgrading their dams, putting in new turbines, making new investments. And those are what I call generational investments. They're investments that are going to look after not just ourselves and our generation, but my daughter's generation and the next generation beyond. And obviously, we also have to make sure through the board chair and the CEO of Hydro that they are going to be managing their costs as effectively and efficiently as possible. We have to demand that out of them too. And I will certainly do that if I'm the leader of the party and Premier of the province. But I do believe investment in BC Hydro is critical to the future of this province.
And back to the panel, and I get to ask a question of the panel, and this one's going to go to Christy Clark for starters. The recent provincial budget, Christy, included no money to pay increases to our school teachers. Is that achievable, and is that fair?
Well, the budget was a budget that the Premier quite explicitly and the Finance Minister quite explicitly put forward to make sure that there was as much flexibility for the new Premier as possible in it. But we have to remember, we are at the bottom of one of the worst recessions we've ever seen in this province. Times are very tough, and we don't have unlimited amounts of taxpayers' money to spend. So the new Premier is going to have to be very prudent about how we spend that money. And as I've already said, my number one priority for families in British Columbia is to make sure that we are balancing the budget. I don't want to spend more than you give us in tax dollars. I think if you have a deficit today, it is just a deferred tax on your children and families for tomorrow. So we need to manage our money prudently. And if I become the Premier, we'll get a chance to look in more detail inside the budget making process and make sure that we're spending it appropriately, but we won't be making big fancy spending promises in advance of this campaign.
And we go over to Mike DeYoung for the next answer.
Thanks, Vaughn. Well, the budget confirmed something else, and that is that we remain at least $1 billion in deficit. We are spending $1 billion more of the taxpayers' money than we are receiving. And where I come from, that's bad news. And so, whilst it is always attractive to pledge additional spending, to provide mandates that will be viewed favorably in terms of negotiations, when the money isn't there, the money isn't there. So, smaller government, a smaller cabinet. I mean, let's lead by example as the leaders of this party, and one who will emerge as the ultimate leader and the new Premier. Let's demonstrate by example that we can reduce the size of government, reduce the size of cabinet, reduce the size of the Premier's office, and demonstrate that we can do more with less while we grow the economy and create jobs and the wealth we need for healthcare and education.
George Abbott, over to you.
Thank you, Vaughn. About, I guess it was 2009, we had a throne speech that made it very clear that to deal with the recession that we faced at that time, that public sector contracts would be net zero. And the government has held firm to that. We have, as I recall, now over 100 contracts with public sector unions and locals at zero. So I fully expect that that will be the same for the negotiation with the BC Teachers Federation. I am certain that we can have constructive discussions with the Teachers Federation and with others who are our educational partners about how to improve the education system. But in terms of contract increases, I think the government will have to stick to its guns in terms of meeting its deficit targets, leading ourselves out of the recession that we've been in, and having a net zero with respect to the BCTF will be part of that.
And the last answer comes from Kevin Falcon, and the last answer in this segment as well. Over to you, Kevin Falcon.
Sure. Well, one of the things I'm proud of, Vaughn, is the fact that actually our government has been the only government in this country I'm aware of that has actually entered into zero-zero agreements with our public sector unions, whether it's the BCGEU or the HEU, or as George pointed out, the dozens of other unions that have agreed, and it's not an easy decision, to zero-zero. The same rules will apply to the BCTF, and that won't be easy for them either, but we are asking everyone to do their part until such time as we come out of this very, very difficult economic times that we've been through in the last couple of years. And I think as a leader of this party and Premier of this province, we have an obligation to ensure that we continue the wage mandate of zero-zero, ensure that we hold costs down, as we will do, and make sure that going forward we continue to build and strengthen the economy so we can get back to where we can reward some of those public servants with increases in the future.
And we now move on to the next segment of the show, and this is one where the candidates get to ask each other questions. And the first candidate who gets to ask is Kevin Falcon, and he'll tell us who he has a question for. Kevin Falcon.
Thanks very much, Vaughn. So my question I'll ask of Christy Clark. Christy, I've made a commitment to run in this election, win or lose. So whether I win or lose, I am going to be a candidate for this party because I want to continue to work year in, year out, and make sure as we go forward, we continue to build this coalition, this free enterprise coalition. Some of the concerns I've heard from some members is I'm not certain whether you're committed to the party, win or lose, and to our coalition. Certainly I know you would be a huge asset. If I was ever fortunate enough to become Premier, I would certainly want to have you there alongside us running. So I'm just wondering if you could answer the question that a lot of members ask me. Given that the Premier said he would step aside and make that seat available and you could run in it, would you commit to running with us, win or lose, in this leadership race?
Well, first of all, let's be clear about my history with this party. I spent from 1996 to 2001, I traveled this province rebuilding the BC Liberal Party after an election loss with Gordon Campbell. And from 2001 to 2005 doing the same thing. I joined this political party when I was 14 years old. I have a deep, deep commitment to the BC Liberal Party and what we want to achieve. But as I've said a couple of times, many times during this leadership campaign, I'm the only person up here who isn't getting a paycheck from taxpayers every 2 weeks in order to run my leadership campaign. And if I lose on the 27th, I'll be the only one who still isn't getting a paycheck. So I have to think about how I'm going to support my family. I have to make sure that I'm able to earn a paycheck. But let's remember, I'm running in this because I want to bring real change for British Columbia. I'm not running in this so I can be just another politician doing the same old thing. I'd be delighted to be part of a BC Liberal government that brings real change to British Columbia, a BC Liberal government that listens to MLAs, and a BC Liberal government that puts families at the center of the agenda.
But Kevin Falcon has 15 seconds left in his time to rebut your comment.
Well, I still didn't hear the answer, actually. I was just hoping for a yes or no, that if you lose, you will still commit to run with us, because I think you'd be a great asset, and I think the members want to hear from that.
Thank you.
Christy Clark gets to ask a question, and she gets to tell us who she's going to ask it of.
I'm going to ask my question of Mike DeYoung. Families are a crucial part of my agenda for government. I want to make sure that families in rural and urban British Columbia are able to support themselves or families, however they define that. And the most important part of a family's first agenda is making sure that you can have a job to be able to pay your rent or your mortgage, or to be able to put food on the table for your children. Now, in British Columbia, we have an urban economy and a rural economy. They are inextricably linked, however. And a big part of that is what goes on in our rural economy and making sure we build those rural communities and the resource sector. That means, I think, that we need to increase trade, in particular with China and India. I know the government has done a lot of work on that so far. But Mike, in your view, if you were to become Premier, what are the next steps in making sure that our trade relationships around the world are maximized?
Thanks, Christy. I think we are discussing a topic that goes to the heart of how we are going to define success in the future. How are we going to position British Columbia, both within Canada and internationally, and creating those jobs and opportunities in every region of the province, the north, the northwest, northeast, the Cariboo, the Kootenays, the island, is all going to relate to how we take that next step. We've enjoyed some success in China in terms of forest products. I was proud to be the forest minister when we began that. I think the next obvious step is to expand that in terms of products and services, in terms of moving into an emerging market possibility in India for wood products and other resource products here in British Columbia. The Premier's got to be our top salesperson. Premier's got to be the person who's telling the world why they want to buy what we produce here in BC, and he or she's also got to be the person that says, invest in British Columbia because you can succeed here.
Both of you have used up your time, and it's now Mike DeYoung's chance to ask a question of whoever he chooses. Go ahead.
Thanks, Vaughn. And George, I'm going to ask you this question. First of all, here we are, I think, four excellent candidates. All have worked together. We've all talked about openness in this campaign, George, and we've talked about how it is we want to do things differently, how we want to respect the taxpayer and promote or develop a trust relationship. How do we do that? And I have a specific example in mind that shows we can do things differently. I posted my donors for this campaign and laid that all out there for people to see. So the hiring committee can decide to check the financial references if they want. Are you prepared to do the same before February the 26th, lay out all of the contributors and the amounts they've contributed to your campaign?
George, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Mike. And yes, I am prepared to do that. And we will be making our campaign records available, including the financial contributions from the various donors. Appreciated your leadership on this issue, both in the legislature in respect of disclosure and transparency around MLA expenses, and I also appreciate the leadership that you have taken in respect of campaigns generally. So yes, I appreciate the initiative that you took in being the first to release your campaign donor list, and we will certainly be following the bold pattern of leadership you set, and we'll be doing the same ourselves.
And George, your chance to now ask one of the other candidates a question.
So thank you, Vaughn. My question would be to Christy. Recently, Christy, you committed to capping healthcare expenditures at the rate of economic growth. As a health minister of 4 years, this is something that causes me considerable concern, particularly with the shifting demographics to a much older population. We know that healthcare demand is inevitably going to increase. And in relation to the 3-year budget that was just tabled, it's clear that if we were to tie it to economic growth, we would have to cut some $700 million from the budget over the next 3 years. So my question to Christy is, are you still committed to capping healthcare expenditures to the rate of economic growth? And if so, where would you begin to find the $700 million that would be necessary to achieve that goal?
Christy Clark.
Thanks for that, George. You can find I've published the most detailed policy platform of any of the candidates in this race, and you can find it on my website at christyclark.ca, and I appreciate it. We published it today, so George, I appreciate you probably haven't seen it yet. What I say in it is that we want to move the rate of spending in healthcare down toward the rate of economic growth. And what's important about that, because we do need to be worried about how we're able to sustain our healthcare system and support it, we also need to be worried about how we're able to sustain all of the other things that government does. And as we look at our healthcare budgets that over the years have just added money and money and money, we find that, you know, that kind of spending is just not sustainable. So what I've said is we should move the spending on healthcare, the rate of spending on healthcare, toward the rate of economic growth in the province. And what's interesting about that, of course, is that it's what's in this government's budget this year. It's what was in the government's budget last year. And I think all of the people up here who are currently in the legislature intend to vote for that.
And in fairness, we stop there so that nobody uses more time than they get. We also come back to the panel now, and we'll go back to Keith Baldry, who has a question, and he starts, it goes first to Christy Clark. Keith Baldry.
Thanks, Vaughn. One of the more controversial projects on the drawing board out there is the proposed Enbridge pipeline across northern BC, connecting to tanker traffic just near Kitimat. If you become Premier, would your government actively support or oppose that project?
I've been up to Smithers. I've been up to the Northwest quite a bit in the course of this leadership campaign. There is a lot of concern up there about the Enbridge pipeline. And there's also a lot of support for it up there too. But I think what the government's role in this at this stage is to wait for the science, wait for the reviews to be done before the government renders judgment on it, and let the company do their job in making their case before the environmental panels that are going to be hearing it.
George Abbott, your answer on that one?
I'm supportive of the Enbridge pipeline in principle, but as Christy noted, there is a National Energy Board process underway, which is likely to take, I don't know, a year or more perhaps. I think it is important that we respect that process, that we respect all of the people who may want to make contributions to that process, and that includes certainly the communities, it includes industry, but it also importantly includes First Nations. And I think we should respect the process, and we should look forward to the outcome of that process, and then assist the federal government in making some informed decisions about the Enbridge pipeline.
And the next answer comes from Kevin Falcon.
Sure, thanks very much. Well, George is absolutely right. I mean, there's a federal process through the NEB underway. It's going to take years. Frankly, where I'm focusing a lot of attention on is making sure we capitalize on that whole northern economic corridor, which is anchored by the Port of Prince Rupert, which I had the honor of being there with David Emerson, contributing the provincial and federal dollars to containerize that port. There are enormous opportunities on Ridley. There's huge opportunities with Kitimat Port, the Stewart Port. I want to make sure we move forward with the projects that we have within our sphere of influence. And certainly I'll be watching the Enbridge pipeline proposal very carefully. And again, it's part of what I call listening, learning, and leading. We have to listen to communities, First Nations, and others, make sure we learn as much as we can. That's what the federal government will be doing through the NEB, and then make a decision based on sound science. That's the right way to go.
And the last answer on that one comes from Mike DeYoung.
Well, Enbridge is one of the projects that is proposed that takes advantage of the fact that we are the land bridge between markets that are emerging, vibrant markets in Asia and South Asia and the rest of the country and the rest of the continent. And on balance, I think we should take advantage of that. But here's the question that I think we need to confront head on. How is it that we are going to attract the support necessary in regions of the province where these projects are going to be built? There are obvious benefits. But it may be time to redraw the social contract between those communities and Victoria. And by that I do mean benefit sharing on a scale that we have not seen before. As a way of saying to communities and the people that live in them, you will not just see the risks associated with a project, but you will see far more of the benefits that accrue from those projects being completed. Thanks.
Back to the panel, Justine Hunter, and the first answer to her question is going to come from Mike DeYoung. Justine.
So where do you stand on funding our ferry system? Is it higher subsidies from taxpayers or higher fares for users?
Thanks, Justine. Well, you got to find a balance. I mean, the equation is not a particularly complicated one. You are either increasing the subsidy, which means taxpayers are paying more through general taxation. You are increasing the fares, or you are reducing service levels. Finding that balance to ensure that we are providing a service that is essential to many communities, essential from a tourism perspective, but also arrive at a rate schedule that does not chase customers away. That's the challenge. And to suggest that there is a magic wand that you can wave that will simply reduce ferry rates and ferry fares without having an impact on either the public subsidy or the level of service is to be misleading, I think.
Kevin Falcon, your answer on that one?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing we have to recognize is what is working well at the ferry system. I mean, we now have labor peace, and we've had it for many years. We've had over $1.2 billion of investment in their fleet, upgrading the entire fleet of ferries, all delivered ahead of schedule and under budget. We've got $300 million invested in the terminals, and we've got an operation that, frankly, is doing quite well. So the issue is, our subsidy to BC Ferries this year will be somewhere in the range of $200 million. That's about $1 billion every 5 years, and the question that needs to be asked is how much more is the right amount? And, you know, this is a difficult decision because I remember during the economic downturn when we tried to stimulate the economy and ferry traffic with a significant cash infusion. I believe it was about $20 million that resulted in double-digit declines in the ticket prices. What was interesting to me is we saw very little take-up in terms of growth in passenger traffic. So we have to keep all of those issues in mind as we think about that.
And George Abbott.
So I agree what Mike said around the combination of user fees and of service levels and the subsidy. These have always been the way in which we have determined ferry rates for the coastal region. What I think is entirely unacceptable from the suggestions or concerns that Mr. Hahn raised recently was the notion that we could have 50 to 100% increases in ferry fare rates on the coast. I am particularly concerned about the smaller rural communities along the coast and the really staggering blow that would have to public access for education, health, and other services from those communities. I think it's important to recognize that BC Ferries have made some very appropriate, very timely investments and reinvestments in their infrastructure. There's a cost to that, and we've got to recognize that we need to keep ferry fares affordable, even though that investment has been made.
You're done, George, and we go to Christy Clark.
Thanks. Well, one of the things I think we'll all have learned from hearing all the candidates speak about this is that it is a very complicated formula, and there are a lot of different things that need to be weighed in it, and in particular, the impact that raising prices has on whether or not we're able to garner more customers on BC Ferries. At some point, if things get too expensive, people will stop using it. And it does have a big impact on tourism. It has a big impact on business. It has a big impact on families' lives. And I do think one of the things that was interesting about what David Hahn said is he offered two options. We're going to raise rates for users, or we're going to go back to the taxpayer and ask for more money. Well, there is another option that he needs to be thinking about. And if I was elected your premier, I'd ask him to do this. Go look inside BC Ferries and see if you can find savings there. See if you can find them in executive salaries. See if you can find them in advertising. There is a third option I think that BC Ferries needs to be looking at, and I think they need to be looking at that first before they come back to us and ask for more money.
And we're back to the panel, and it's my turn to ask a question of the panel, and the first person who gets to answer this one is George Abbott. The Liberal government has repeatedly promised to build the Evergreen transit line serving the Tri-Cities, linking to downtown Vancouver. The budget to build it is still short $400 million. How should that funding gap be closed, George?
Thank you, Vaughn. The agreement with respect to the Evergreen line is one that is with the federal government, with the provincial government, and with local governments through through TransLink representing Metro Vancouver. I had a very good meeting recently with representatives both on the political and administrative side of TransLink. Their concern is around the tax increases that might be incurred by the 1/3 local government share for that. I've committed to sit down and work through those issues with TransLink. There may not be any easy ways to achieve this project, but what I do believe is that there will be enormous value added that will come with the construction of the Evergreen line, and I think we can sit down and have a very important, very constructive conversation between TransLink and the province and perhaps the federal government if they wish to engage on this important matter.
Kevin Falcon on the Evergreen line.
Well, I've been through this movie before, Vaughn, with the Canada line, and we had local mayors voted down several times, and there was a lot of politics that go on around these kind of issues, but ultimately we said, no, we're going to build the Canada line, and I was proud of the fact that it was delivered ahead of schedule and on budget. Now, the Evergreen line, the mayors came to me, I was the minister at the time, and said, we want a provincial government commitment. So we committed $435 million. They then said, we want the federal government involved. I worked with my colleagues, Ian Black and others, and worked with James Moore, the federal MP, and Doug Horn and others to say, let's get the federal government to the table. And you know what? They came to the table, $450 million. And now it was time for the local mayors to do their part through TransLink. And now they're saying we don't want to pay our share. Well, I have to say this, that, you know, we can't have great lines built throughout the province of British Columbia serving the needs of the lower mainland without someone contributing towards them. And I'm not going to ask the residents of Pouce Coupe in the north and other rural parts of the province that may never use it to have to contribute more so they don't have to contribute towards their own improvements.
Christy Clark.
Well, I used to live out in Port Moody. I represented it for a long time, and I know the need for the Evergreen line from a very first-hand perspective. And I'm glad that the government has made a fair amount of progress in getting there after decades and decades of people promising it. But Kevin has identified some important issues. People in rural communities should not be paying for transit for people who live in the lower mainland. But I do think, you know, one of the keys to making things work with TransLink and with transit in the lower mainland is trying to work cooperatively. It's trying to find solutions together. It's not, I think a confrontational approach with splits people apart will never get us the answers that we need. I think that's always been one of the problems over the years of many governments with trying to get the Evergreen line together, is that if you don't work together, you can't make things work when you have such a complicated kind of funding formula and governance formula as we have with TransLink.
Mike DeYoung.
Thanks, Vaughn. Well, the Evergreen line is a great project. A real value added component to our transit system. But it is predicated on an agreement amongst three parties. And one of the parties is now saying that they are either unable or unwilling to abide by the terms of that agreement. And sure, we can say, well, we're going to push ahead in any event, but actually, I think we've got into a little bit of trouble as a government telling people what we're going to do in every instance, and what's good for them. If the folks in that region have decided that it is unaffordable for them today, I know a lot of folks on the island or elsewhere in British Columbia and the Kootenays and the Caribou who can think of things to do with $400 or $800 million in transportation capital spending. So there's an agreement in place, and I think it is incumbent upon the parties to respect that agreement.
And we're finished with the panel segment again. We're now to the last segment of the show with interchange. We go back to the candidates asking each other questions. We reverse the order, and George Abbott gets to ask a question, and he'll tell us who he is asking it of. George.
Thank you, Vaughn. My question is to Kevin. Later in 2011, Kevin, as you know, there'll be a referendum on whether we retain the harmonized sales tax or return to the provincial sales tax. One of the promises, or I think it was a promise you made early on in your campaign, was that potentially we would reduce that harmonized sales tax by 2 percentage points were the referendum to be successful. The cost of reducing a point of HST or PST for that matter is $800 million or $1.6 billion. For 2 percentage points of HST or PST. So my question to you is, if the harmonized sales tax is defeated, would you extend your commitment to reduction of the PST by 2 percentage points? And if so, how would you find those dollars?
Well, thanks very much, George. Great question, because I actually believe the HST is the right public tax policy for the province of British Columbia. And what people forget when they think about the cost of potentially reducing the HST rate is the cost of us losing that referendum. That's $1.6 billion we will have to pay back to the federal government almost immediately. And what I've said as part of this leadership campaign is I'm going to use this opportunity to talk to British Columbians about my idea of initially reducing the HST by 1%, that's $800 million, and a further 1%, it would have to be years out when we can financially do it responsibly. And I didn't make that commitment lightly. I sat down with the finance minister before I launched my campaign to make sure that I could talk about a 1% reduction and know that we could do it in a responsible way. But I really believe that that may be what is going to be necessary to bring a majority of the public on side to support what I believe at the end of the day is good public tax policy.
Over to you, Mike DeYoung, and tell us who you're going to ask a question of.
Thanks, Vaughn. Christy, I asked George a moment ago in the earlier segment about how we can, as leaders, show leadership and provide full disclosure of who is financing our individual campaigns and trust the people to have that information before they vote and hire a new premier on the 26th. Are you prepared to do the same?
I will be releasing all of the donors to the campaign. We are required to do so by law. We'll be doing that after the vote happens, which is the commitment that we made to the donors when they made it to us. So we will be, as we are required by law, making sure that all of those donors are made public. And every penny of it and how it's spent will also be made public. And I do want to say, Mike, I admire the fact that you've released your donors. And I'm more than that, though. I think your commitment to making sure that we make public money when when MLAs are spending it, when cabinet ministers are spending it, and how that is spent public. I admire that because I think we have to move there. Every other jurisdiction, or most other jurisdictions in North America, have been there for a long time. So I think that's a change that is long overdue in the legislative precincts in Victoria.
Mike, because your question was so brief, you have another 40 seconds for a rebuttal.
Thanks, and thanks, Chrissy. Isn't this a chance for us, though, to show we can do things differently? Because you're right about what the legal requirements are, but as we try to engage with British Columbians and demonstrate our willingness to do things differently as leaders, wouldn't it make more sense to reveal that information in advance of the vote?
And you've got a few seconds to reply there, Christy Clark.
Well, I mean, my campaign is all about doing things differently. It's all about making sure the government is engaging British Columbians and listening to them and bringing a different style of government. That's why I'm asking for a mandate for change here. But we will. It's a week away. It's a difference of a few days, I think.
So now you get to ask a question of one of your colleagues.
And now, all right. So I'll ask a question of George Abbott. Thanks for that. George, you have proposed a referendum on the carbon tax. And you know, because we've had this discussion before, that I have reservations about putting taxes to referenda in this province. I think that, and particularly for the carbon tax, which has already been through something like a referenda, which was something we call an election. Why would you put a carbon tax to referendum?
Well, first of all, the issue of the carbon tax, all of the dollars that are raised through the carbon tax levy go back to the public in tax cuts of one way or another. The question that I want to pose, and I think it's entirely appropriate to ask this question of the public, because government's going to have to make a decision by July 2012 whether to add any additional increments to the carbon tax. I have great reservations about that. I've met recently with a greenhouse grower in Delta, has 30 acres of greenhouses paying $300,000 a year in carbon tax levy alone. We are putting, I think, our greenhouse industry in great danger. I don't believe that it would be appropriate to have additional increments past July 2012, but I also think it is appropriate to ask the people of British Columbia their advice with respect to this important issue. I know there's been a suggestion from you that that somehow makes us California. It certainly does not. I think it makes us practical and commonsensical when we do that.
Thank you, George. Christy Clark, you've got a few seconds to rebut that.
Well, there are two problems with putting taxes to referenda in British Columbia. You wonder what other taxes would go to referenda. But the other question is, if we have taxes by referenda, we are going to end up with a lower mainland-centric tax system. And I don't think that's where British Columbia needs to go when we want to build our rural economies and make sure our tax system reflects the needs of people who live in local, resource-based rural communities. I think that's an important part of our tax system.
Okay.
And fundamentally, that's why I don't support putting taxes to referenda.
Time's up for you, Christy, and we're going to go to Kevin Falcon, and he can decide who he's going to put a question to.
Sure, I'll ask a question of my colleague Mike DeYoung. Mike, you and I have both been strong advocates for building the Asia-Pacific trade relationship. You, as a forest minister, you pointed out We're the one that initiated the whole forestry demonstration project in China, which has now led us to almost half our exports going to China. I have always believed fundamentally that the Asia-Pacific is the biggest opportunity, that if we can translate the cultural diversity we have in this province that has already built that cultural bridge to Asia, that we can turn that into an economic opportunity that will serve us for generations to come. Mike, I'm wondering if you can share your vision of not just how we continue to open up China, but also the huge emerging market of India and what that can mean for the future of our province.
Thanks, Kevin. Well, as I said earlier, it is ultimately going to determine our success as a province and our prosperity as a province going forward. We have this incredibly strong cultural link. And the question is, can we turn that cultural linkage into this powerful economic partnership? I think we can, but we've got to apply ourselves to it. People don't wake up in the morning in Punjab, in Ludhiana or Delhi and ask what they can buy from British Columbia. We've got to be in their face. We need a salesperson who will go over there and ensure that they are aware of the products and services that they can purchase from us and the opportunities that exist here. There's another thing we got to do. We've got to update an antiquated visa system in British Columbia and Canada particularly, because if people can't come here, they are not going to be thinking about investing here, and that's still a problem.
Well, this is very exciting. We have a bonus round in this because they all didn't use every last second of time. They had a group of 4 politicians who didn't talk too much. And so the bonus round is going to see Keith Baldry ask a question of the panel. And I guess what? You're going to start with Kevin Falcon again.
I guess we'll start with Kevin Falcon again. Once upon a time, the BC Liberals promised to reduce child poverty in this province. Instead, on your watch, the child poverty rate in this province has actually become among the worst, if not the worst, in the entire country. What specific steps would you take to get rid of this problem?
Well, you know, Vaughn, often in politics we engage in a battle of statistics about child poverty levels. But, you know, at the end of the day, the fact of the matter is this. The child poverty is driven primarily by 3 groups. It is recent immigrants, it is single mothers, and it is, of course, First Nations. And I can tell you that what we have to do is actually focus on how we can get results. It does require some partnership because, of course, on First Nations, particularly on Reserve First Nations, the federal government plays a key role. But what I want to do is get away from an argument and a debate about statistics and start saying what can we do that actually generates results? What can we stop doing that isn't working? And how can we take those dollars and focus it on getting results for kids? Because you know what? I've got a 1-year-old daughter, and I am certain that every parent in this province that has young children doesn't want them to be raised in poverty, and I will continue to ensure we do everything possible to get the results that meaningfully help children in poverty across this province.
Christy Clark, child poverty.
Well, first, let's be clear about the statistics. BC does have the worst rate in the country, although it has improved since the NDP were last in government. So this government has made some strides in trying to address it, but more definitely needs to be done. And one of the things that we have to do, that I propose doing if I become your premier, is match the federal government working income tax benefit. That would add $75 million. We'd phase it in. It would add $75 million to families' bottom lines, which I think is important for people who are the working poor, who may otherwise be facing a welfare wall. We want to make sure that those bottom lines are improved for families across the province. So that's a first step for people who are working hard for their families and having a very difficult time making it. I would also eliminate the training wage and raise the minimum wage once we see the consultation, the results of the consultation that the provincial government's now undertaking, and we'll plan how and when it's going to be increased, but we will increase that minimum wage. I think those 3 things will do something to try and improve the bottom lines of families. I'm running to improve lives for families in British Columbia, and this is an important part of it.
Mike DeYoung, child poverty.
Thanks, and Keith, for the question. Look, families are poor, and the results of that befall their children. So how do you address that? You can try to program your way out of that, but in a community where there is 80% unemployment, where there is no job opportunity, the cycle of poverty will continue. The recipe for ending that cycle of poverty is education, training, and job opportunities. It's not simple to do, but the recipe, in my view, is that simple. So we can continue to try and manage poverty, or we can manage opportunity and create opportunities for families so that their children have the education and the jobs necessary to provide a living and to have the fiscal wherewithal to carry on. That's ultimately the answer to poverty.
Last answer, child poverty, George Abbott.
Thank you, Vaughn. if government wants to make a difference in terms of child poverty or any other issue, it needs to focus on that issue in a very determined way. That's why I have proposed a child poverty reduction plan in line with that of New Brunswick. It is vitally important that we focus on, that we have some benchmarks, some commitments that we can make that will see improvements. I had the honor of being British Columbia's Aboriginal Relations Minister for a couple of years, and I have seen all too often the poverty that comes, as Mike said, with very high, chronic high unemployment rates, health outcomes that are far inferior to the balance of the population, and even today only 48% of Aboriginal kids graduating from high school. We need to focus on all of these areas: health, education, economic development, ensuring that we give First Nations a real opportunity to pursue and fulfill their dreams as our children do.
Thank you, George, for the answer. Thank you, candidates, for the answers. And we come to the final bit of the show, and these are closing statements. Each candidate gets 2 minutes, and we start with, I'm guessing here now, George Abbott.
Thank you, Vaughn. 1 week from today, Vaughn, the BC Liberal membership will be making an enormously important decision. A week from now, BC Liberals will be electing their leader and the next premier of this province. It is absolutely imperative that those BC Liberal members elect a premier that can rebuild trust and confidence in the electorate in British Columbia. We have not governed as we should have always in the last year and a half. We've lost a lot of trust and confidence because of the way we handled the HST. It is time for government to reconnect with the grassroots in this province. We've got to get government out into communities in the regions and reconnect with people, hear their real-world problems, and begin to try to work collaboratively with local governments, with the federal government, with the people themselves to build those kind of collaborative solutions that will make a difference in their lives. It is absolutely imperative that government do that. I believe I have the experience to provide that kind of leadership. I've been a long time in local government, 16 years in local government, 15 years in the provincial government. I'm proud to have led some of the most difficult ministries in government, like health and education. I have a proven track record throughout my 30 years in office. I'm very proud of what I've been able to achieve in health and education, Aboriginal relations, and elsewhere. I want to build a team, a stronger BC Liberal team, that can not only reconnect with the grassroots of this province, but build a BC Liberal team that can bring us to victory again over the New Democrats in 2013. It is absolutely imperative that we come out of this election campaign, this leadership election campaign, united as never before. We know what occurs when the coalition breaks down, and that's an NDP government. That is not something which our province, which our great free enterprise coalition can afford to have. I look forward to working with you, and I ask you for your support on February 26th. Thank you.
And Mike DeYoung, your closing statement.
Thanks, Vaughn, and to all of the panelists and to my colleagues. What a great delight and honor to be part of a process involving 3 friends and colleagues with whom I've worked in the past. And thanks to the viewers who took time out of their schedule to watch tonight. I hope you found it helpful for the important decision that lies ahead. I've been lucky. I've been able to serve as an MLA for 17 years this week, as a matter of fact. And I've been privileged to serve as Forest Minister, as Aboriginal Relations Minister, Labour Minister, Attorney General, Solicitor General, Government House Leader for much of the past 6 years. And I've learned some things along the way, some things about trust, about how if you want people to trust you as a publicly elected official, you need to trust them. You need to trust the people. And there are ways we can do that, new ways that we can do that. Provide people with information, whether it's the monies that we pay to MLAs to defray their expenses or their operation of their constituency offices, whether it's disclosing the source of your campaign donations in a timely way. That's about leadership. That's about not doing what I say, but showing people what you're prepared to do. I've learned about respect for the taxpayers. And in my view, deficits are the ultimate expression of disrespect for the taxpayer. Sure, it's a lot of fun at a campaign time to tell people about all the money you're going to spend, all the ribbons you're going to cut, but we are $1 billion in the hole. And that needs to be addressed as a first priority. We have to think about how we're going to reduce the size of government, reduce the size of the Premier's office. Again, that's leadership. That's leading by example. It's been a pleasure to be here. I want to thank my colleagues. Good luck to everyone making the decision on the 26th.
And Christy Clark, your closing statement, please.
Thank you very much. Thanks to everybody for joining us today. And thanks to all the BC Liberal Party members, the 95,000 people who have decided they want to be a part of this historic decision to choose our next Premier in British Columbia, something that British Columbians haven't been able to do directly for about over 20 years now. I am seeking a mandate for change. I am seeking a mandate for changing the way that government is done in Victoria. I am seeking a mandate to change government so that it focuses on families first, so that we are thinking always first and foremost about how we are going to create opportunities for families and make it easier for families to get ahead. How are we going to respect and value the work that families do in every community across this province? I am seeking a mandate for change so that government listens, so that I can lead a government, I hope, that will begin to listen to you, that will engage you, that will allow MLAs to make their voice heard, even if sometimes it disagrees with the government. I am seeking a mandate for change in a government that will make sure that when we are doing things, we include you in those decisions before we make them. A mandate for a government that will inspire, I hope, your confidence and your trust. We need to present credible change in this election campaign if we want to beat the NDP. If we don't present change for them, for British Columbians, the NDP is going to present that change instead. I believe that I represent that change. I believe that I represent credible change as someone who spent the last 4.5 years in a business where I listened to people for a living every single day. I learned a lot about listening in that job, and I learned a lot about how to make sure people feel included. On February 26th, I hope you'll vote for me and my mandate for change. I've offered the most detailed policy platform of any candidate in this race. You can find it at christyclark.ca.
Kevin Falcon, the last statement, the closing statement goes to you.
Well, thanks very much to the panel, and thank you to all the listeners out there. You know, I was born and raised in British Columbia. I love this province. I care about it deeply. I was born in a family of 6 boys. My mom was a nurse for 30 years. My father was a small business person. He had the misfortune to develop a degenerative illness, and you know, as he was robbed of his ability to speak and had to be tube fed, and my poor mom as a retired nurse had to look after him 15 hours a day, I never forgot what that meant to us as a family, how important government actually became at a time when our family could never have afforded the kind of health care that my father received. And you know, I think about our great party, and I think about what is necessary to ensure we continue to have good government in this province, government that understands how important a growing economy is. And I realize that the BC Liberals have a difficult decision because I'm joined by 3 other great leadership candidates. And the issue really is who among these great leadership candidates is the best candidate to take us forward? Who best can lead our coalition, keep our coalition together, a coalition of federal Liberals, federal Conservatives, maybe lapsed reformers, but they all come together under the BC Liberal tent to keep out that sort of common enemy, that NDP government that will always come in here and wreck the economy and force us to have to rebuild. But also who can lead our caucus? Because, you know, our caucus is important too. Those are the people we are asking to lead, and I'm proud to have the support of 19 members of the caucus, including 11 cabinet ministers. But at the end of the day, I also think leadership matters. I think leadership is about the ability to get things done. It's about making sure the Canada line gets built even when you run into lots of local opposition, and often for reasons that are completely unrelated to the merits of the project. And I want to make sure that we do have a premier and a leader of this party that recognizes some of the decisions we make aren't necessarily in our own interest, they're for the next generation. And I want to govern for my daughter's generation and for your kids and your grandkids. And I will commit to doing that. I ask for your support on February the 26th. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kevin, for wrapping it up there, and we are done. We've heard from the candidates, we've heard from the panelists. I want to thank my fellow panelists here. I want to thank Keith Baldry, Global Television, Justine Hunter, Globe and Mail newspaper, and thanks to George Abbott and Mike DeYoung, Christy Clark, Kevin Falcon. Thanks for coming on. Thanks to everybody here at Shaw for all the work they've done putting this together, and for those of you at home, thanks for watching. I hope you heard something tonight about maybe about Medicare premiums or hydro or ferries or something like that, let you know a bit more about the people that are running for the job of Premier. These folks next weekend, February the 26th, February the 26th, Liberals will pick one of these people as the next leader of their party. And around about the middle of March, that person will be sworn in as the next Premier of British Columbia. Thanks for watching us tonight on the BC Liberal Leadership Debate, and good night.